My first question you got via email, so you prepared maybe a little bit mentally. Um, but what was written in your heritage on the day you were born? So, what of your parents' story did you inherit?
Hmm. So I know you sent me the question beforehand, but I only looked at it very briefly because I think it's much better in the moment, isn't it? I don't really think about this so much in terms of the day I was born. We often think about what comes afterwards and what the world kind of layers on us. But essentially, I suppose it was a bit of a complex start in terms of day one because I was born in the middle of apartheid in South Africa. So a lot of what I was born with was not really chosen. It was kind of thrust upon our family, if that makes sense. So I was born in Eswatini, which used to be called Swaziland, and it was really quite a safe haven for a lot of mixed race couples. Anybody who was maybe already living in South Africa who wanted to be together, to have a family, and if they were from different races, were obviously not allowed to do that in South Africa. So we had that sad story in terms of my mother being South African and my parents meeting in Johannesburg, but not being able to be together there, which is a big part of why we were born and brought up in Swaziland. But then on the flip side, we were actually in a country where there were lots of mixed heritage and mixed race families. So on the positive side, where a lot of mixed race people may have been born in the UK or other parts of the world where it was less seen, we were one of many, many families who were mixed heritage because of that escape from the South African apartheid. So we had both stories, a little bit of a sad side of, us not being able to go and visit our family in South Africa that much because of the restrictions, um, but also being surrounded by many children in our schools and who were our family friends who were all mixed race children as well. So we didn't really feel like we stood out as children in Swaziland. So that's really what I inherited from day one from I suppose a geopolitical landscape, and obviously really inherited parents who were clearly very forward thinking and already were very inclusive and had this deep sense of seeing humans as humans and falling in love with somebody who was completely different to them in a time where it was completely illegal. So a very strong personalities and strong characters that would have settled into my genetics as well. So I guess quite a confident version of knowing and understanding yourself and what you want to do and who you are versus listening to what the world tells you that you can and can't do. So I'm very grateful for that, even though it could have been a difficult region to be born in.
I I didn't actually know that about Swaziland and that it was such a
Mm.
safe haven in that period of time. So how how much of your youth did you spend over there in that um safe haven that sounds like a mix of people?
Yeah, so I left there when I was 6 years old. So very strong early foundations. But yeah, very young when I left, but we went back and visited quite a bit. And I still go now, obviously, because my father still lives there. So he was actually living there before he met my mum. So he had semi settled there. Um, but yeah, I feel like I am not necessarily Swazi in the sense that I understand Swazi culture through and through, but there was certainly a real population of people who mirrored my family. And so those are quite formative years up until about 5 or 6, where you're really looking around and when you're just starting to understand some version of identity. So I think any younger, it might have been a challenge for me to come to the UK and suddenly be surrounded by children who are mostly one race. Um, but 6 was long enough for me to feel recognized and understood as, one of many mixed heritage children.
Yeah. And tell me about
Mm.
coming to the UK at 6 years old and being confronted with a society that is of a different um cultural mix, I guess.
Mm. I mean, it's funny. We grew up in areas that were very mixed in terms of many different races, religions, cultures. So when we first came to the UK, we were in council housing for quite a while. And a lot of people will say, oh my God, that's so sad. But actually, it was so nourishing for us because we were struggling and it was difficult. But at the same time, we were surrounded by people from all over the world who were fleeing, wars and hardship and for many different reasons. And we were also living with many British people who were experiencing hardship. So I remember our apartment block just being this incredible array of human beings and all of us feeling that we were different, but for a good reason. It was not unusual to be surrounded by people from all over the world. So I really appreciate that start in London, actually. But what was more um, kind of stranger, I guess, was that suddenly there were not actually that many mixed race children.
Mhm.
So there were people from everywhere, but not many people who were from multiple cultures or had parents who looked completely different. So it was the first time that I actually looked around the classroom and thought, oh, I am actually the only mixed race child in the room. Um, and I didn't feel anything kind of strange about that or uncomfortable about it. My parents were very, very good at reminding us on a regular basis to be very proud of both of our heritages and to not feel pushed by society to one side or the other or to be referenced as either black or white. So what did come as a surprise as I was growing up was that in the UK it was a lot more common to be referred to as black because we are black mixed heritage because we've got one black parent. So I got a little bit confused about that when I was a teenager, where people would refer to me as black, and I would think, but no, I'm mixed race. In South Africa, obviously, for better or for worse, people are categorized very specifically, and you wouldn't call a mixed heritage person black or white. um, so that's when I started to realize, oh, there's a kind of different perspective in the UK around if you have one black parent, then you are very much pushed into the category of a black person. And I just couldn't get that because I was both. And so it was a
Mhm.
constant, and it still is now, a constant kind of correction of people calling me black and me saying, I don't mind really what people want to call me, but I know who I am and I'm mixed heritage. And that's the most accurate way to describe myself because that's literally just what I am. And that's very different to being in Swaziland in South Africa, where that I just wouldn't be referred to as black. So it was a cultural difference that I had to get used to. But I'm the kind of person who just kind of goes with that and thinks, oh, like, oh, guess what? I've got some information for you. I'm mixed heritage. I don't.
Yeah.
It doesn't really eat me or um, make me feel. I don't know. It doesn't stop me from understanding my identity. It doesn't make me feel less mixed heritage or less original in terms of who I am. I just know that now it's my norm to correct people and educate them because they don't even know. They're not doing it out of malice most of the time. They're simply doing it out of what they were taught and how they were taught to categorize people. And so a lot of people appreciate that if I say, well, maybe just check in with someone on what they want to be called and then call them
Yeah.
what they decide. So that was the journey in the UK. It was a transition from in terms of the way people are categorized racially.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I grew up in the Netherlands, and I feel like it was pretty much the same as in the UK. Um, and my mother very much pushed us into the "you are black" category, but from
Mm,
the view that when people see you on the street, they see you are not white, ergo you're black. What you would have
yeah.
experienced as well. So I think my mother took it from that vantage point. Um, but I think a lot of people might not know and truly understand the South African perspective.
Mm,
Because I think, within the framework of the world, I think it is a different kind of concept of how to speak about it. Um, can you
mm.
enlighten people a little bit more about what the history there is, and why, so many people in South Africa have that label of mixed, and carry that so intently, whereas they don't really do that, I think, in many other countries.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it is a more of a different perspective. I mean, South Africa is primarily it's an African country, so it's primarily black people, which we could sometimes forget when you're in somewhere like Cape Town. But historically, many people came to South Africa through different routes. Obviously through slavery from Asia. And then obviously Europeans came, the Dutch, the British, the French, many people came. And so that's where people started mixing. And originally it was just people mixing, but then over time, as happens in most places, the smaller group feels threatened, and that was the white population was very small and still is very small. But over time they got worried, and it became this idea of essentially colonizing an African country, like we've heard many times before, and creating a racially segregated society to have, the apartheid government, which apartheid is, the idea of separating people, and categorizing people based on the color of their skin and sometimes even just the texture of their hair. And that was to make decisions around who could have an own land, who could have specific jobs, areas that you were allowed to live in. So they're specific. That's where you get townships, South Africa, where black people would live. Areas in Durban, which were mixed with more Indian culture, and Cape Town, where we have more of the Indonesian and Malaysian mixes, all mixing, essentially with black people at some point. But so this categorized society meant that the apartheid government had to have very specific labeling for people to be able to put them physically in the right area, but also give them specific rights. So black people couldn't have passports, for example, whereas white people could. And if you were mixed heritage, you had more rights. If you were Indian, you had more rights than black people. So black people were really at the bottom of the rung, and white people were at the top, and there's somewhere in the middle where was everybody else. And so that's where the categorization came from. So I guess that's why in South Africa, everyone really knew what their categorization
Yeah.
was, because it dictated life journey and their privileges. So that's why it became very clear. And in a way, that's obviously an awful history and not a great way to live, and is certainly not what we want to see happening anywhere else. But I do think that what it did do is make people think about who they were and who they are, from a heritage and race perspective, and is why, I guess, to a certain extent, and I say this very carefully because obviously it's such a sensitive topic around apartheid in South Africa, but that must be why I'm very aware of my real racial identity.
Mm.
That it strikes me as really odd that the majority of the world would put everybody who is not white into the same box, because there's a vast array of many different types of people who are not white.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess from that point of view, I'm quite grateful that from day one, I was either forced to understand what my heritage is, but actually that came to my benefit, I think, as a identity, as a label that I chose myself, versus me um, categorizing myself in a way that society sees me.
Yeah.
So I think I'm grateful for that, but I do have many conversations. And obviously, we've had so many great chats, and you've spoken to so many people about how do you, and should you move from leaning into the categorizations that the world creates for you versus who you are, and
Mm.
how do you have that conversation? Many people don't see it in the same way that I do.
No.
Many mixed don't see it in the same way that I do.
Yeah. And I,
Mm.
I think we see it quite the same. But
Yes.
because also I think you have to navigate it internally as well, right? In your literal family structure. It's like I think like me, you have a mother who's of Black heritage and a father who is Caucasian, and you are both of them.
Mm.
And I have personally always struggled picking one because it felt like I picked one parent over the other or something. Like it's a real weird mind thing. Whereas like I tried to make it make sense and it just didn't. Um, whereas you
Mm.
probably, like you said, um, there was something for you to choose that was middle ground from day one. The Eswatini story. So when you are there and you are surrounded with people who look like you or a lot more probably than when you are in the UK, do you feel like you more belong there? Does it feel like an easier place to be or to move, or does it not matter for you? Do you?
Yeah, I mean, it for me it doesn't matter, but it might be because I had those first 5, 6 years where people did look like me, that my friends looked like me. I mean, my friends, I had white friends and black friends as well when we were at school. It was everybody, including many mixed heritage children. So I don't know where that comes from. It might come from that early grounding where, like you said so beautifully, there was an option for the middle ground from day one. So I never felt that I would ever have to choose one side or the other. Um, and I think that maybe moving to the UK and suddenly having this realization that it's not like that everywhere. They're not mixed heritage children everywhere at that point. I mean, now there are so many mixed heritage children. If we were, when if only Saskia we were born now, then
I know.
there would just we wouldn't worry about it as much, right? We're everywhere. But I just feel that whether it was in me or whether, and I think my mother played a big part in this as well. I was brought up by my mother, so my parents separated when I was 6 when we moved to the UK. So it was my mum, my sister, and me who moved to the UK, which is fascinating in itself because my mum's, is a Black South African, trying to make a life in the UK with mixed heritage children, and so we have an English father, and now we're being brought up in English culture. It's quite difficult for her to for her to integrate and try to make us feel that we belong here as much as we did in Swaziland. Um, but part of that education, that journey that she did for us was if ever anybody was to make a comment about, our hair that was different to a white child or a black child, or to say something about, the color of our skin or whatever it is, her first reaction would always be just be proud of being mixed heritage.
Mm,
She would always take me back to that. She would never, maybe, I think that maybe in some ways, especially somewhere in the UK and a lot of the world, that maybe many parents might find it easier to say to their mixed heritage child who is being called black to just kind of go with it in a way
mm,
and just kind of what society says you are. It may be an easier thing to do, and the complications around that I will never quite understand. Um, But what she always did was to always say, you are both,
mm,
you are mixed, and you should be proud of that. It's a unique thing. It's something that you should love. And, she always made us feel excited about being mixed heritage. She never tried to, um, motivate us into any particular direction. And that's not the conversation I've had with every mixed heritage person I've met. And there's all these disparities and conversations around how different it is if your mother is black versus your mother being white, the way your mix is,
mm,
whether and in the UK actually was when we came here, if we did meet mixed heritage families who were black mixed heritage, it was mainly the father who was black actually and the mother who was white, which is different to South Africa where it's mainly the mother who's black in general. So even that conversation was a whole thing in itself. Um, but I just have always felt that we have lived as a family from the point of view of being a good human being as an individual versus your race or where you're from or your privilege or anything else. And so we were always very guided in believing in ourselves as a entity, as a spirit, as consciousness, or whatever you might want to call it. And all the labels and everything else were additional things that society creates for you on your behalf. And you may need to understand them and you need to be able to navigate them, but they're not who you are. Um, so I feel very, very lucky for that, because we hear so many voices telling us what to do and who to be. And the conversation can get extremely complicated. But sometimes maybe it starts with us understanding who we are and making a decision on that, and then navigating from that point of view and being understanding when people are confused about you and want to ask a few questions, have the opportunity to educate them and to share your perspective with them. So that's really how I see it. But it's not to say that I don't feel, attacked in ways on a regular basis, or I see that people view me in certain ways, and I see that people will judge me because of my hair or, certain aspects of who I am. And so I do feel that and I do see that. But because I know who I am, I can often just bat that off more easily, or feel more confident to explain why that's not true or why it's not me.
Yeah,
Um, but it's hard. It's still hard.
it is. Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. And I really um, love when you say, your mother made you feel like it was an exciting thing to be both. And in a sense, I think I have in many ways experienced it as a privilege somehow as well
Mm.
to be of both. Um, how has it how do you think that duality and holding, almost those two extremes in a way, how has
Yeah.
that been beneficial to you in your life?
Yeah. And I think I remember us having a great chat on this once, one of our one of our like long coffee chats, and I talk about empathy a lot in my work. And sometimes I wonder where that came from and why I care about empathy so much, why I care about understanding other people's perspectives so much, and why I think it's such a solution for so many of the world problems that we have. And I think it's partly because of us being able to, well, not even having to practice how to see multiple perspectives. We were just born into a life in which we had to practice this skill. We had to learn this skill from day one, because I'm a big believer in that everybody's parents, regardless of who they are very different, and you have to kind of understand both personalities, and you flow between them, and you're not sure what to say to one and not to the other, and they're just different people. Any parents are different people. But when you do have parents who are from wildly different cultures, my mom's from a township in South Africa, my dad's from like, a historically quite wealthy family who, would have had stately homes back in the day. And, he was kind of the one who ran away and went to Africa and did his thing. They're wildly different cultures. Um, and we just had to really lean into both of those and understand the nuances of both of them as a natural part of our life training in a way. So I don't think you and I really knew that we were learning a new skill, learning how to juggle multiple um, cultures, multiple personalities, multiple truths in terms of how they were brought up so differently. And so when we go out into the world and we meet people who are different to us or different to each other, it's not our first rodeo.
Mhm.
It's not the first time we've witnessed people in the same room disagreeing on topics because they simply come from different cultures and don't see it in the same way. It's the same conversation that's happening in workplaces. And when you look at your friends having conversation, you think, oh my gosh, they're just not seeing that they have a different perspective because they come from such different places. We see that immediately. And I think that is, and we don't see it as a threat. maybe less of a threat. It's how our lives were shaped from the first conversation we could have and the first conversations we witnessed in our households. So I guess we're just well trained in difference and
Yeah.
accepting difference. And I don't know if that was always a good thing, because I don't know what you would say, but the stark differences could be quite a challenge. But now we know how to deal with um, cultural difference, and we understand it. We're not new to it.
Yeah, and I guess it doesn't frighten you that much. Um,
No.
you also wrote a lovely book um, on this topic, didn't you?
Yeah. Did. I did. Sometimes I forget I did. um, with Saskia, I did. It was so my sister has two kids, and they are mixed heritage as well. So their father is mixed heritage and Angolan Portuguese, and she's obviously the same mix as me. Although I mean that's a whole other topic. Her hair is completely different. She's light, so we navigate the world. The world sees us very differently
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
of our kind of visuals. We look similar and we behave very similarly, but ultimately she will have more privileges, and I will have less in the world that we live in. Um, but she has two kids and they're mixed heritage. And I simply wanted to buy them a book, and I wanted there to be mixed heritage characters in the book. And it took me months of research. And I think I found about four or five. And they were often really touching on the challenge of being mixed race. And it felt that if I was to give them these books, they would start reading about the challenge of being mixed race before they would start enjoying and embracing the fact that it's a wonderful thing, or, to be proud of it. So I decided to write a book, and it's called Meadow and Marley's Magical Mix. And they actually called Meadow and Marley, such great names for twins. So, so it just made sense for me to create something for them. That's how it initially started. I want them to read something that not only actually has them in the book as characters, but that addresses the joy of being mixed heritage.
Mm,
Um, the story really is about them wanting to understand where they're from and what their culture is, and they're too shy to ask because they're not sure how to ask the question. And eventually, obviously, my sister and I are in the book as characters as well, and eventually we explain to them just how wonderful it is to be mixed heritage, but also to embrace everybody wherever they're from, and to enjoy everyone's uniqueness, and to accept that and love that. And so yes, I published it about 4 years ago, and then now that was when they were about 2, 3 years old, and now they're actually kind of at the age where they can really read the book, and they've been reading it or looking at the pictures for quite a number of years, and I just hope that that has helped to give them a solid grounding in a similar way that we had about being proud
yeah.
and joyful about its heritage, rather than maybe being confused or feeling like you don't fit in. So yeah, and I hope lots of kids have bought it, and lots of parents have enjoyed it. And I hope for a long time yet that many mixed heritage children will see some resemblance in there, and yeah, and be proud of who they are.
But isn't it wild that we started this conversation where you said, "Oh, if only we'd grown up now. There's so many more of us scattered around, and in the 80s, we definitely weren't in every street. But still, for you to find a book that talks about it
Mm,
4 years ago, or is difficult. Like,
yeah. Yeah, it's wild. Actually, you're right. It is wild. I mean, I remember at the time I was writing the book, there were some stats saying that there were in children's books, in picture books, there were more um, animals as characters than black, or were basically more animals as characters than non-white human beings, and that really shook me. And I thought, wow, that is appalling. It's embarrassingly appalling. And yeah, and that was only 4 or 5 years ago. So we have still got a long way to go. And I think, Saskia, when you said you were going to do this podcast, I know we had some conversations around, when is the right time, and how do you do it, and who wants to be involved in it, and what are the different things that we're all going to say. And there still aren't enough conversations
Mhm.
around this topic. And even when you look around, like you say, we see more mixed heritage people from many different mixed cultures. And if you were to go down the DNA testing route, many people who think they're one thing are just not,
Yeah, true.
which I find hilarious. Yeah. We all think we will try to categorize ourselves. It's so crazy.
Yeah,
But this conversation is not being had enough. And it doesn't always feel safe to have the conversation
yeah.
because the mid ground is not really truly recognized in all settings.
In so many settings, and I think that's also part of the reason, I called it Essays in Sapien, and I start here because this is my story as well, but I do think, and I think it speaks to what you said earlier as well, what the advantages are of growing up in such a DNA mix, um, is that it makes you feel comfortable, more comfortable, not comfortable, but more comfortable in the gray, I think, in like the in between spaces, not just in culture, but in so many things. Like I think we are able you know, to be the bridge, walk on the bridge, build the bridge, because um, yeah, being in the middle doesn't scare us that much, I think.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people want to have things defined. It's either black or white. It's yes or no. It's left or right. Like, please don't tell me that it's gray because I don't like that
Yes.
space.
Yes.
Whereas
So
that's
true.
exactly the space that we inhabit, you know? And even to the point where I wonder when you have to put the tick box, are you black? Are you white? Are you mixed? Are you mixed with Asian? Are you mixed with African? Are you mixed with da 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 da? What what do you tick?
I always laugh about these boxes because the list is getting longer and longer, isn't it?
Exactly.
um, yeah. And I feel bad because there's always going to be someone who's left out because they're mixed, will not be listed. Um, I mean, I think now currently the option in the UK at least is Black, African, and white. And I also find that quite funny as well because I was like, "God, there's so many different types of white." So, like, all the all the non-white options are very categorized,
Yeah.
like like Black African, I don't know, Caribbean Africa, Black Caribbean, Indian. But then it's always just
Yeah.
white, and I always think, oh, maybe there are some people who want to say I'm Black African and white Italian,
Yeah.
or Black African and white French. I mean, I don't really know like who decides on these things, but essentially, I put the Black African and white. What do you put? I suppose the same as me, right?
Do you know what? Oftentimes I say that I don't want to say. I don't know why, but
Do you?
I get really defensive about it, and I'm like, "Well, why do you want to know who I am?" Like, I don't know. I I don't know why I do it, but a lot of the
Yeah.
times I'm just like, "Nope, I'm not going to tell you. Prefer not to say. That's my box." And it's not because I know what I am, and I know that I'm proud to be mixed, but for me, um, oftentimes I'm just like, if you're putting me in that box, what are you going to do with it? I prefer perhaps to be
Mm.
nondescript for and to confuse you even more. I don't know. Maybe that's maybe that's the
To
game that I
surprise you,
play. Yeah.
surprise!
Here I am. Yeah. Also because I think growing up in the Netherlands, and that might, yeah, someone told me that they put those boxes on the census at least. Um I feel like it was 2021 or something. Not 2021, 2001 in the UK. I think before that they didn't even have it. And then over time, as you say, the list just became longer and longer and longer and longer. But I couldn't remember it from the Netherlands. So when I moved here and I had to fill in all these tick boxes, it really confused me. And I'm like, I don't know what you guys are wanting to do with this with this information. So I prefer not to say. Um, but yeah, it's interesting.
And I think that's a valid response.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
I
like,
mean,
I
the
think
box
it's
is there
fine.
for a
Yeah,
reason.
like, why? Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know. I think from a, it's funny. I think because I used to be a recruiter and I was genuinely interested in that data because it would help us to drive our recruiting initiatives and our marketing to make sure that we were getting, a diverse range of candidates. And that when somebody would say to me, because obviously it was always a challenge, with diversity and getting a vast array of people into certain roles, and something that we were always trying to fix in the organizations I worked and personally wanted to be part of was making sure that we were not discriminating against certain people. And so without that data, it was really hard for me to do my job.
Yeah,
So I think that that's probably why I always tick it,
yeah,
because I'm sometimes skeptical about what's happening with that data. Um, but more often than not, depending, I don't really know how it's used in many places, but from a recruiting perspective, it really helped me to say, oh my goodness, we only had applications
yeah.
from, 2% of our applications were from Black candidates. Why aren't we getting more Black candidates into the pipeline, for example? And what can we do to fix that? So it helps with that. But otherwise, I do sometimes get worried about, is someone going to look at that and will they judge me based on that? Because we know there are many people out there who do discriminate
Mm,
and they might use that information, for ill regard. So I can completely understand why it's not comfortable for everyone to tick that
mm.
box.
I saw this video on YouTube many, many years ago, and it was from a lady called Taya Selassie. And I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but she in that it's a TED talk, and in it she talks about not necessarily mixed people, but I think it's very much about uh, diaspora people who
Mhm.
like our mums and our your dad, I guess, as well, from a reverse perspective. Um, when you get the question, "Where are you from?" and then
Mm.
I'm from the UK. I'm British. Yeah, okay, but where are you really from? Oh, okay. Um,
Yeah.
and she puts it. She's saying, I wish we couldn't ask people where they're from. I wish we could ask people where they're local. Tell me where you are local, the place where you feel like you know the streets, you know the language, you know um, the rules of that particular culture. Um, do you have
Yeah.
more than one place where you're local, or do you feel more local in one than another, or is it even, you know, you feel local in a country where you didn't even reside ever? Do you have, if I ask you, Katie, where do you feel like a
Yeah.
local? Where would that be?
Mm. Do you know what? I think I watched this a long time ago as well, and I forgot about this kind of way of looking. Now, I would say that it's London, specifically London, not necessarily England, but specifically London. But if you asked me, so I moved to the UK when I was 6, but then 4 years ago, I lived in Cape Town for 4 years. So that was the first time I had lived in South Africa itself, um, for any period of time. My sister's been living there for nearly 20 years now. So she would say that local for her is definitely South Africa. And for me now, I would say it was London. But before I had lived in South Africa, I wouldn't have been able to answer the question as clearly because having lived in the UK up until that point and having this question all the time of, where are you from? Where are you from? And if you say England, then people go, no, no, where are you really from? It was just so much easier to say South Africa because then they would say, oh, yes, I thought I heard something in your accent or something about the way you look. And then obviously most of the time I was around with my mum, who is, very much South African. So I would kind of eventually just say, whatever, South African, even though I'd never really lived there,
Mm,
you know. But then after I moved to South Africa, I had the same thing. So everywhere I went, everybody said, "Where are you from?"
Ah.
And then I would say, "Well, I'm black. I'm in South Africa. This is where I'm apparently from." But I really wasn't from there, and I didn't know
Ah.
the streets, and I didn't know the language and everything. So it was the same thing as England, and I thought, "Oh, that's really fascinating. I'm not really from either of them in other people's eyes." And then I realized when we moved back to London that this is definitely where I navigate most naturally. This is where I'm local. This is where I know the streets. I know the way that people behave. I can navigate it in my own way. So this is where I'm local. But I would never say that I'm British
Mm.
only. So I wouldn't revert to because this is where I'm local, then this is where my heritage is from.
Mm.
So I'm still very much like local here, but I am both South African and English. And I always will be because I have now lived in both. I was brought up with the culture of both. Um, you know, I've got this third country, Eswatini, which kind of comes into the mix, which is none of my genetics, but is very much feels like home in a different kind of way, maybe more spiritually and more in a more grounding way. The place of your birth, I think, always plays quite a big role in your identity. But local, it would be London. How about you? Where would your local be?
Oof. Yeah. Um, Amsterdam
Mm,
and Leeds now as well. I mean, it did take me a very long time. But in Cameroon, I think I lived there for a year. Um, and I don't navigate it, the way that I go from A to B here. It's a language thing for me as well. It's predominantly French, especially where my mum's from. Um, and while I can converse, I am definitely not a native. And and culturally, yeah, as much as it sometimes does, I mean, that's part of the reason I think why I wanted to have these conversations as well. I think it does great on me, that
mm,
I perhaps can't marry the two up as equally as I would like. Uh, you
mm,
know, I've had a few conversations now on here where people have lived in the other country, and I think that's something that I've never had, and I think it is. I've always struggled with the fact that I was raised with a mother who said, "But don't forget, you're black." But that part of me, I could
mm,
never really access, and it's really difficult. It's really difficult
mm,
to inhabit something that you don't really understand, um, but
mm, mm.
that the world does see, you know.
Yeah.
um, so
Yeah. Yeah.
I yeah, I I miss that, and it is difficult for me. And I'm married, not married, but I've been with a Caribbean man for many, many, many moons now. And and he grew up in that culture that, even though he was born and raised in the UK, but he was very much embedded in that, and I think I do miss that, and I tried to look for it when I went to Cameroon for when I was 18, and I got some of it, um, but I yeah, yeah, it is something that I still struggle with, and I somewhere I do feel I don't know what the right word is, whether it is, um I don't know if envy is the right word, but when I hear you, going to, South Africa, and I grew up there, and you have that link and that closeness and that feeling of, I know what it is like to move in these places. And also, I guess for me, maybe,
Mm.
and that's why I appreciate the South African story as well. I studied in South Africa for 9 months, uh, and and I remember that I wasn't weird there, you know? I remember
Mm.
that whereas
Mm.
in Cameroon, I'm just weird. I'm like, "Oh, hi, white girl." And I'm
Oh.
"What? Who? What?" And they'll say things like, "Oh, you glow up in the dark," and stuff like that, and it's
Wow. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
But it is interesting you think about it like that, that even reminds me of, even in Swaziland sometimes because we're known as the children of the white man. We live in quite a rural part of Swaziland. And so many people would see us as white children because we're children of the white man. And it's
Mm,
almost like it's the other way in terms of, here where people would be more easily referred to me as black.
mm,
There will be people, in the African continent who, because they see us born from a white person, that we are white, that we're white. And I remember once doing a talk. You probably had this as well, but when it's Black History Month, then I would get called in wherever I was working to be on a panel to do a talk, and I always found that quite challenging. And I would often say no, actually, because I would say, but I'm not black.
mm,
So, you know, it doesn't make sense for me to come on here as a mixed race person and pretend that I understand what the black experience is. And in many ways, maybe we're seen as more acceptable to bring in and talk about these topics
mm,
because in some subconscious way, people do connect with us a little bit more if they're not black.
mm,
And so they feel more comfortable having that conversation with us, whereas we're not the right people to be having that conversation because we're not having the black experience. And so I said yes to one talk. I mean, I did many and it kind of expressed this feeling throughout lots of them. But I did one talk where it was all about why would you call me black if you wouldn't call me white?
mm,
Because I just wanted people to open their eyes to the fact that, you know, and I've been told times before as well that the fact that I don't want to be called black is because I'm embarrassed about my black
mm,
heritage. And that's why I'm trying to be called black. And this is from mixed race people who are similar to me who have said this to me. And I've said there's nothing to do with whether I want to be seen as black or white. It's simply about saying exactly who I
yeah,
am. That is literally all I'm doing here. And I think that, I really feel for you in terms of being brought up and maybe being referred to as black is one thing, but then never having had the experience of living in your mother's country and having that experience is like a double
yeah,
layer of wow, I'm being referred to as something and as if I understand the experiences of a country that I've never lived in. But that is how society will still prefer to label me,
mm,
you know, when you're in Amsterdam and you're speaking Dutch and you're Dutch in as much,
mm,
as Dutch as much Dutch as you are, Congolese. And so this is why I think we have to, this is, I suppose, a bit of when I just kind of surrender to all the things that people could call us, and we could, the same us, this one individual can travel to South Africa and be called something else, and then go to the US and be called something else, and then go to Brazil and be called something else. And, everybody has a solution for our identity, or they have the label that they would like to call
Mhm.
us, and it's mainly what's comfortable for them, not what's comfortable for us. And so I think the sooner we can really, embrace all of the parts that we are, regardless of whether I don't speak any South African languages,
Mm.
and sometimes I do feel funny about when I'm in South Africa saying, I am South African. And then they try to speak to me in Afrikaans. I'm like,
Not me.
no, sorry, I can't speak to you actually. It's a really funny feeling. And you do think, oh, I'm not South African anymore. Um, but, many, many people are not many things.
Yeah.
And, we we are who we are. We're all individuals, and we have this added complexity. But many people would argue that they have their own complexity.
Oh, totally.
Um,
Totally. And I think
yeah.
when I grew up and when I would get that question, "Oh, where are you from?" And obviously I'd speak perfect
Mm,
Dutch. And it's like, "Ah, okay, but, where are you really from?" Um, and I remember so
mm,
vividly starting to answer that question directly when I got it. It was like, "Oh, my father is Dutch and my mom's from Cameroon." And at some point, I must have been
mm.
in my teens, I was like, "Isn't it odd that when someone asks me where Saskia, is from, I answer it in two
Mm.
entities that are not me." So
Yes. Yeah. I do that too, and now you've made me think about this. This I do that too. I guess it's just us trying to explain, um, this unknown entity that somebody's standing in front of, because it's the easiest way, because we know what the follow-up question is gonna
Yeah,
be. Where are you really
yeah.
from? Oh, but where were you born? And I have to say I'm someone who doesn't mind the questions, and I know that a lot of people get very upset about the questions, but a part of me thinks it gives me a chance to actually explain myself,
Mhm.
and for someone not to wander away and decide on a label for me. I get to actually give them the label I choose. But you're so right. I do that too, because it's just so much easier than the rest of it. It's just like, okay, you want to know how this happened. Easier to explain with two entities. These are the two ingredients, and
Exactly.
and then people. I don't know about you, but do then people look like they acknowledge and understand when you do that?
Yeah, generally, I think they
Then
do.
they're like,
Like, yeah,
oh,
okay. I mean, no, they'll probably go like Cameroon. Yeah, no idea. Let's locate that as foreign, and then Dutch. Yeah, okay, tick.
yes, I mistakenly called you Congolese earlier, didn't I? I
Oh
just
yeah, yeah,
realized.
yeah.
I said that you had never.
It's okay. It's next door.
It's like you've never lived in the Congo. Well, why would you have lived in the Congo?
I mean, it's funny enough. I did spend a fair amount of time there, so I probably was there as long as I was in Cameroon, but I was there for work. But yeah, I mean, and that's another thing. Um I have I think that is, from what I was just referring to, saying I grew up in the Netherlands, born in the Netherlands, ate Dutch food. Like my mom would on occasion um cook Cameroonian food, but back then, I mean, honestly, you wouldn't be getting any ingredients from there. Um and but I think because I was so deeply curious about where that part of me was from, I just I just got this massive fascination with pretty much the entire continent. Um, and as a result, that is where, my travels moved to. That's why I went to go and I study in South Africa for a little bit. That's why I went to Zim and Mozambique and Kenya. Like I was just like, this is the place where all my curiosity is pointing
Mm,
towards. And if it wasn't given to me
yeah.
um um by place of residence, I was going to
Yeah.
make it my adult mission to go, to go there as much as possible. And I've always I've always loved it. I'm still surprised that I don't actually live that I live in the UK for
I'm
some
surprised
reason.
that
I
you
was like,
don't live
"What?"
somewhere on the African. I know. And you know what? It's funny. Like, sometimes I think about this as well. It's funny the things that we can trouble ourselves with because, you know, you were saying earlier about how you couldn't find, another word, but kind of, maybe a little bit envious that I was born on the African continent, for example, and then I lived in South Africa for 4 years, and maybe I have more of a connection with that part of my heritage. But then when I hear you, and when you've spoken to me in the past about how many different African countries you've actually traveled
Mm,
to and lived in and experienced, I do actually feel a little bit envious too, because because it's almost because I was born on the African continent that I haven't been
mm,
to a lot of the other countries. I've been to lots of countries in Southern Africa, and in Morocco, for example. But everyone goes there. But actually, there's an almost oh well, I was born there, so I don't necessarily need to explore as
mm,
much. And then you are exploring and learning about so many different African cultures. And so I think that we find our belonging or whatever it is in our own way, whether that's just by the just by default being born there. It's not something I planned or chose to do. It's just what happened, or making the choice to move back there after living in the UK for a while, or whether it's traveling and being, going to do part of your education in a different African country, or working like you have in many African countries. Um, we will, if we have the desire and the curiosity, we'll bridge that gap, whatever it is that we think we have that gap, in other ways, and that will look different for all of us. And I think it doesn't make one version more rooted in our true heritage than another.
mm,
Um, because it will, I mean, even if I look at my sister now and I think, oh wow, she's actually South African. We're from the same parents and we're born in the same place, but she moved there nearly 20 years ago and she hasn't come to London. And so even siblings will have a different version of, that sense of belonging or where their local place is. And I know that your sisters also live in many different parts of the world. And maybe that is the beauty. Part of the beauty is this flexibility and the having the
mm.
option to actually explore multiple cultures. Many people wouldn't even have that drive or that option.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why I do think I called it like a privilege, and it's a very unique situation you find yourself
Mm.
in, and it does open possibilities that many other people might not have. But like you say, even if you do have it, it doesn't mean that you want to explore um, all of the different parts of yourself. I'm conscious of time, and I don't want to keep you too long. I think there's one question that I definitely wanted to ask you is that, do you think your parents were aware of what it is like or was like? No, I should phrase it differently. Do you think your parents are aware of what it is like to be of mixed heritage for you as a child?
Ooh, really finishing on a big one there.
Go on.
You just
Take a deep breath.
dump it on me and then
Or just say, no, sir, we're
I'm
done.
going to need
We're
it.
done.
Like,
Because this is another hour.
look, just realized I've run out of time. No, such a great question. I I think that my mum was a lot more aware than my dad. My mum's mother was mixed heritage, so my grandma was mixed heritage. And because of apartheid, she was very dark skinned and she was categorized actually and moved into a black area, interestingly, but she didn't speak any of the African languages. And that was a whole challenge for her. But so my mum was actually brought up by a mixed race mother, but very much in the context of being categorized as black, actually, in South Africa, funnily enough. And all of her friends and family, everyone who lived in her area would have been black. So, and my mother obviously looks black, she's, I guess a quarter German. So I think my mom was more aware, and she had this South African upbringing that had the categorization. So she was always aware of the difference between somebody who was mixed heritage and black. And in South Africa, mixed heritage is still called coloured, which I know is a word that is not used outside of South Africa and has different references. But in South Africa, a mixed person would be called coloured. So she had a lot of awareness in terms of how the world would see us, or at least how South Africans would see us, and that there would be a big difference between how they would see her versus us and how a white person would see us. So she was quite aware. I think she wasn't aware of in England that people would refer to us as black. So that did surprise her. I think my dad was kind of less aware, coming from a very white, coming from the British countryside, and not being of a race that you have to think about your safety and your privilege as much. He wouldn't have put much thought into it. He would have just thought, I love this woman. I want to have a family with this woman. I'm very aware that she's black, but this is not a challenge for us. We'll make this work. More of a kind of relaxed attitude towards what it means to, I suppose, marry across races. Whereas my mum would have been on the forefront of her mind, what is going to happen to me? What is going to happen to my kids? So I think my dad went into it a little bit more chilled. But I do remember when we moved to the UK, that's when he started getting concerned about the fact that we were mixed heritage, because he had some awareness of the fact that we would be very different, and that being in Swaziland, we were around many families who looked like us. But with that move to the UK, I remember him specifically kind of showing concerns about the fact that we would be visibly, culturally, our accents at that time were not British, that we would stand out. And he was very concerned about that. And he only really kind of voiced this as I got a bit older, but I realized that he was concerned, but didn't really know what to do about it, and didn't really have a plan of action, whereas my mum had a plan of action. But again, he was always very much of the same conversation as my mum, which was that you are both of us. You are both black and white. He didn't try and push us into a certain box either. But yeah, I suppose the short answer would be that my mum was very aware and my dad was a lot more chilled until we moved to the UK, where he started to think, ooh, it's going to be challenging, but I think you're strong enough for it. It was kind of a bit like that. You'll get through it, but but it will be different.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that it just made me think as well that I have had instances with my dad, where they haven't realized that we are family, and that they would just think I was his girlfriend, or you know. Have you had that?
So do you know what? I think we've had this, and I remember. This might sound completely rude, but I remember once my dad, because we were in such different countries, I suppose, but I remember once my dad visiting us in London, and I was out with my sister. It was my sister and my dad, and we were in King's Cross. At the time, King's Cross wasn't gentrified in the way that it is now. And I remember my dad saying something. People were like looking at us, and, he was very aware that that's what people would think. And I don't think we really understood that. And he said something along the lines of, oh my goodness, I think people think that maybe I'm here because I've, that I've kind of come to like meet some ladies or something. Because people don't ever think that we're his children in the same way that you just said. And I was like, what? I thought, oh yeah, we're in King's Cross. And we don't look like your children.
Ergo, we must be. Oh my word.
Exactly. And we're old enough to be working. So,
Oh, honestly.
so yes, that is a huge misconception I've also had, because my dad is quite a bit older than most of my friends' dads. So I remember being dropped off at school when he would visit, and my friend saying, "Oh, did your granddad drop you off?" Because it made more sense that maybe my granddad could be white, but
Yeah.
not my dad, but also he was a lot older.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I've had it all. I've also had adopted, where people just assumed, "Oh, I just thought you were adopted,
Oh,
right?" And I was just like, what? That came like left field. I was like, I've heard many
oh,
things, but that was like, oh yeah, no, I guess I could could tick that box. No, it's like wild. Yeah,
yes. Yes. I mean, it is funny. And it's the assumptions that people make, and they're so confident with
yeah,
them. And in fact, it reminds me actually that a friend of mine at university said that she thought that my dad wasn't my biological
mm,
father and that he was my stepfather. Um, and so there were all these versions, and I never really. It's only when I have conversations with you, really, or somebody else who kind of understands, when you think, "Oh my gosh, did someone actually say that to us?" Confidently assume these
exactly,
things, you know.
exactly. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fascinating, and I could talk to you about this,
Mm.
until the end of time, and I'm sure we will.
We will. I'm just waiting for my next trip to Leeds, or you to
Yeah.
London. We need to our next 2-day conversation.
Um, but I'll stop it here for now. But thank you so much for gracing me with this conversation. And I hope the people who listen get something out of it. If not, at least going onto the map and figuring out where Eswatini is. I think that's already a win. Um, but yeah, thank you. And I will make sure that people will also know where to find you professionally, um, because you do a lot of great space, like you say, in the empathy, sound baths, meditation space. So, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Saskia, and for doing this, for being brave and actually doing this. I think it's going to help a lot of people. I appreciate you a lot, being in my life, and I appreciate this conversation a lot.
Thank you. Same here.